to Germany. From Alaska to Puerto Rico. All over the world, the United States Army is on the alert to defend our country, you, the American people, against aggression. This is the big picture. An official television report to the nation from the United States Army. Now, to show you part of the big picture, here is Sergeant Stuart Queen.
In Korea, the aggressor's challenge was met and turned back by the united forces of the world's free nations. Yet, in the backwash of war, there always remains a second challenge. The thousands of orphans, the millions of homeless, the countless villages and cities ravaged and almost completely destroyed. Today's big picture focuses on one such city, Seoul, the capital of the Republic of Korea. It is the story of a city twice the parade ground of communist troops, 4 times a battlefield. The rebirth of Seoul is also the story of man's enduring will to triumph in the face of the greatest adversity.
In the past 2 decades, the face of disaster, reflecting tragedy and despair, has become a familiar portrait in every quarter of the world. With but brief pause, war's grief has touched and scarred the people of every continent. No longer is the soldier the sole victim of battle. A nation's cities and towns are now prime targets. The casualties, civilians. Despite the repeated experience of the miseries of war, mankind has learned neither to maintain peace nor to accept callously those who suffer most. During the lifespan of the present generation, a new list of ravaged cities has been formed to compare with those of ancient history. Their very names are synonymous with ruin. Warsaw, Manila, London, Hiroshima, Berlin, and today, still another, 4 times crushed in less than 2 years, a city which refuses to die. Seoul, the Korean capital since the 14th century, the capital of South Korea since 1948, lies in a hill-surrounded valley. One of the most modern cities in the Orient, Seoul in the summer of 1950 enjoys a democratic form of government and an orderly existence. However, above Seoul, troops of the puppet North Korean government installed by the USSR are poised on the border. For some days, the communist radio has been urging the unification of all Korea. Now, on the 25th of June, with true communist logic, the North Korean forces go on the defensive by launching a sudden, unexpected invasion of South Korea. Seoul's 1.5 million citizens are caught unprepared, but they are not ignorant of what they may expect. Half a world away at Lake Success, New York, the United States immediately requests an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council. When the aggressors fail to heed the Council's appeal, the United States announces that air and sea forces are being ordered to assist South Korea. Then, by a vote of 7-1, the Security Council votes to supply the besieged Republic of Korea with whatever armed might is needed to turn back the attack. First to aid are American forces from Japan. 15 other nations meet the challenge by ordering troops to Korea. With this decision, the free world takes its first unified action in halting the tide of communist armed aggression. 2 days following the initial attack, communist troops are in the outskirts of Seoul. By every available means, Seoul's populace flees the beleaguered capital. Carrying whatever possessions they can salvage, the civilians travel every road and path. Thus begins the weeks-long march of women, old men and children, as they are forced south behind the retreating South Korean and small American forces. For them, safety lies only in caves or behind the Allied defense line drawn below the Naktung River.
History Hit is an award-winning streaming platform built by history fans for history fans. By subscribing to History Hit, you can access hundreds of hours of military history documentaries on demand. Follow in the footsteps of the Essex Dogs with Dan Jones, or discover the history of archery with Ray Mears. We've built up an extensive library of history programs, hundreds of hours of documentaries, exclusive original films, interviews, and ad-free podcasts made for proper history fans. Sign up now for a free trial, and War Stories fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code WARSTORIES at checkout.
Mistaking retreat and consolidation for defeat, the communist armies are caught off guard when the United States 10th Corps launches an offensive of its own. At Incheon, Seoul's seaport, an amphibious landing is made, cutting behind the North Korean troops battling to break through at Busan. The counteroffensive works like a vice. Simultaneous with the Incheon landing, Allied forces break out of the Busan perimeter, driving the startled aggressors before them. A second amphibious maneuver is used at the Han River, just south of Seoul. Once more, the Republic's capital becomes the focal point of the fighting. Either the communists must hold Seoul, or the North Korean army will be destroyed as an effective fighting force between the closing sides of the vice. Seoul is not to be taken without bitter and costly resistance. Every road is a minefield, every corner a barricade, every house a sniper's nest. Less than 11 days after the start of the counteroffensive, Seoul is restored to its rightful inhabitants. To most Koreans, Seoul is more than a city or a home. It is a symbol of national pride and of the people's heritage. Even before the sound of fighting dies, the first refugees reappear. Few return to find their homes as they left them. The communist troops have lived off the land, sacking, pillaging, raping the city during their brief stay. But in the refugees' eyes, what remains can be rebuilt. Life can be resumed once more where it was so harshly interrupted. For the communist leaders who gambled when the odds were seemingly overwhelming in their favor, the reversal achieved by the United Nations Command is intolerable. A second fairy tale is devised. An army composed of so-called Chinese People's Volunteers, armed with weapons of Soviet manufacture, is rolled south to salvage victory from the ashes of defeat. For the men who fought their way to the Manchurian border at great cost in blood and in life, the massive offensive launched by the Chinese communists comes as a cruel shock. The scores of mountains and valleys fought for and captured return too easily to the enemy as the Allied forces make their bitter withdrawal. In the face of the greatest hardships, examples of great bravery and fortitude are many. The escape of the United Nations units from the trap at the Chongjin Reservoir ranks with the finest maneuvers in military annals. Under constant pressure from overwhelming numbers, the Allied troops fight south back from Pyongyang, from Munsan to Seoul and beyond. Again, battered Seoul becomes the scene of a mass exodus. Those who began the long task of rebuilding their city see their efforts wasted, their work destroyed. To most, the routes from the city are now familiar. The number of refugees is smaller this second time. The number of those who will return, smaller still. Into Seoul march the Chinese conquerors, supervised by their Russian comrades. News of Seoul's fall is greeted proudly throughout the communist world. A new type of barbarism awaits the American servicemen captured during the Red Offensive. Months of imprisonment accompanied by subtle brainwashing and crude torture lie ahead. Many will not survive the forced winter marches to the prison compounds north of Seoul. By breaking contact with the enemy and rapidly withdrawing to the south, the UN command forces the communists to extend their supply lines more than 300 miles. Less than a month after the Chinese invasion, the United Nations returns to the offensive from the defense lines 30 miles below the Korean capital. Although the communists have twice gained the advantage through sneak attacks, time and world opinion are on the side of the United Nations command. From the free world, a steady stream of arms and men has poured into South Korea. The new UN drive is power-packed. Now, for the fourth time, Seoul changes hands. Even before the city is liberated, plans have been made for rehabilitating the stricken capital and its population. Here, in the words of American soldiers, members of the United Nations Civil Assistance Teams, and of Koreans themselves, is the story of the rebirth of Seoul as they witnessed it.
We moved into Seoul on the 13th of March, 1951. As UNCAC team commander, I went with a patrol of the 15th Infantry and an engineer detachment detecting mines. Except in the fringes, there were no people to be seen. In downtown Seoul, opposition had fallen off almost completely. In the center of the city, we found practically no one at all. The city was a dead city. Because this was the second time we took Seoul back from the communists, we were pretty much prepared for what we expected to find. You never get used to it, though. All in all, the city was in awful shape. No water, no transportation, no electricity or power. As a matter of fact, the Chinese occupation forces took most of the overhead wire. Kids are the ones who always suffer most. They never know what's going on or why. And how can you explain to them after they've just seen their whole family get killed? Seoul was in very bad shape as far as food was concerned. There just wasn't any. The communists who professed to be representative of the working people, of the farmers, seem to take advantage of them. They live off the land, taking their food, not giving them medical treatment. Everyone came back as soon as they could, a lot of them right out of caves. So our first job was to get water for civilians and our troops.
During the occupation by the Chinese, there were many fires in the city which could not be controlled. This caused a great deal of damage to the city. In order to get water into the hydrants, we had to get the waterworks going. In addition to that, the sanitary needs of Seoul has to be met. It looked like it will take 6 months to get water back into the city, but this estimator was far wrong. With much hard work and cooperation between the American Army, the Korean government, and UNCAC, within 30 days, we were able to produce enough water to be used by all the units within the city. And shortly thereafter, we were able to restore 50% of the water supplies to Seoul.
On the third day after our entry into the city, UNCAC started to move truckloads of rice into the city for distribution to the people. Because for the average civilian, the average Korean, it was worth his life to find even a handful of rice. Even though the city was placed off balance to civilians, except farmers who needed to get their fields planted, civilians managed to come home. So it was our job to feed them before they starved. The trucks with food rolled into the city day and night, fighting against time. For an American like me, who's used to eating pretty well, it takes a little time to understand that these people can survive on just a few handfuls of rice a day. But that's all it is, survival. We couldn't make up for a couple of years of war overnight for these people, but we made a good start. Rice was just the beginning of a long term of relief distribution. We followed up as fast as possible with milk and clothing and other food. The Korean farmer we came across is the backbone of Korea. Despite the devastation, the number of moves he had to make with his family, which he had to or be killed, the farmers were back in their fields even before the fighting was over. These farmers are doing a lot to help relieve the burden of feeding the people who live in the city.
Next to feeding the people of Seoul, caring for their health, I would say, was the next problem. Those who were well, we first dusted with DDT. Then all must be inoculated. This was important to stop disease from possibly spreading. It would have been most dangerous for an epidemic to start under the conditions as they were. The inoculations were most successful, for no epidemics broke out in Seoul then or thereafter. When I and my staff were assigned to the hospital in Seoul, I was terrified a bit, I must say to start with. There were patients, there were patients. There were children, men, women. It was a mass of humanity suffering, much tuberculosis and many surgical cases. But we went to work, and as we worked, we trained more doctors and nurses in the methods we needed. Mostly the dangerous cases were burned cases from napalm bombs and all sorts of other bombs and gunshot cases. Now the bomb cases were the first problem, and medical supplies, most especially plasma. Well, we received the supplies and the plasma and the other things urgently needed. I and my staff and all the doctors and nurses in the city worked morning to night, and I can say now I'm very happy and proud too of the success we had in saving so many lives.
To keep Seoul itself alive meant reopening the highways, rebuilding the bridges. No field army in history undertook a bigger civil assistance mission than the United States 8th Army. Our policy is to help the Koreans to help themselves. First of all, to get heavy equipment into the city, we had to put the railroads back to work. Trolley transportation got a high priority. The Chinese used the tracks to place mines alongside of, so that the detectors, the mine detectors, could not pick up the mines. In some cases, these mines exploded, and in other cases, tracks were hit by fragments of shell fire. So a great deal of track had to be replaced. So now we've replaced just about all the existing trolley lines. Like any large city, Seoul has its downtown business center, its industrial and residential sections. The trolleys are a big help in bringing workers from their homes to the dozens and dozens of construction jobs and factories that are being rebuilt. Things aren't yet back to normal, of course, but they're well underway. Most of us figure Seoul is one of the cleanest cities in the Orient. It's certainly the cleanest in Korea. Right from the start, the people started to work, rebuilding their homes and hospitals and other buildings with the same kind of determination they showed in wanting to get back to their homes in the first place. Even without modern construction equipment, they set to, and new buildings started to mushroom up almost overnight. During the years before the war, Seoul developed into a good-sized industrial city. But the various bombings of the city completely destroyed the power plants. To get heavy and light industry back on its feet, we had to restore the power plants. Army technicians went to work to repair what was salvaged, and missing parts came from Japan. Now power is going out fast where it's needed most. It's the job of the Civil Assistance Commission to encourage industry back into operation as quickly as possible. By this, we mean that we assist these people in the reconstruction of their plants and in supplying them with the necessary material. That is, the crude material which can be used for manufacturing purposes. Raw materials are the #1 priority in the problem of production. In this particular factory, about half the cotton comes from the United States, the other half from Korean sources. As well as turning out needed products, rehabilitating Seoul's industry means more jobs for the city's population.
With our colleges and universities, Seoul is the educational capital of Korea. As a people, we Koreans put high value on education. Rebuilding and expanding the school system is one of our chief aims. Where we found no school buildings for the classes, where the schools were burned or bombed, we held outdoor classes so as not to interrupt the education any more than is necessary. In the Republic of Korea, it is the policy that everyone goes to school. By law, every child over 6 is entitled to full primary schooling. But we can now take only 3/4 of these children. Poverty prevents some parents from sending their children. In other places, there are no schools. But we are educating more children every day.
Some children, the orphans, are less fortunate. These children are found sometimes in the streets, other times at people's doors who have no children. We have over 200 children at this orphanage alone. The poor little things have been many days without food or bathing. Some die on our hands. Other times we get them through all right, and it gives us great joy to see them happy again. Earlier, it was very difficult for us to nourish these children. But now, with the help of the American officers and men and the CAC organization, we have much pleasure of giving the children anything they want. We have only to ask for it, and we get it. If we need anything at all, we have only to ask, and the children get all the vitamins and anything that they need. We are making the best efforts to make the children good citizens. But there are many, many of them who need support. And we do all we can. But with thousands of orphans in Seoul alone, there are thousands and thousands in all Korea. With God's help, we will help them to be happy children and one day good citizens.
With the same unity and forcefulness with which it met the challenge of communist aggression, the free world responded to the needs of the Korean people. Food arrives from Australia and Cambodia, from Belgium and Cuba, from New Zealand and the Philippines, from Pakistan and Thailand, from Mexico and Greece. Clothing comes from Japan, Peru and Uruguay. From Great Britain, Nicaragua and Turkey come medical supplies. From India and Norway, from Israel and Sweden, from Denmark and Germany, Iceland and France, and from the United States alone, aid totaling nearly $500 million is received. The list of public and private organizations, churches and veterans groups, private citizens and charities, which have come to the aid of these victims of war, is equally long. To have done less, to have failed the Korean people in this their second hour of need, would have been to allow defeat by neglect, where defeat by aggression was so determinedly denied. Today, from the seaports on the Yellow and Japanese seas, steady streams of urgently needed supplies pour into Seoul and other Korean villages and cities. The tools and machines of industry, the fertilizer and equipment needed to restore the land to fertility. The faster full rehabilitation is achieved, the sooner the Republic of Korea will become a strong, vigorous ally. Seoul today has regained much of its former stature among the national capitals of the world. The city is living testimony to what international cooperation for peaceful goals may accomplish. Where a few short years ago tanks rumbled, trolleys now pass calmly through the streets. Where snipers once hid, the housewives of Seoul calmly do their shopping. The rebirth of Seoul is one of mankind's truly great achievements. Yet the task of reviving Korea completely, or even of Seoul alone, is still far short of completion. More than 1 million homeless people remain. Nearly 100,000 orphans must be cared for. A livable future must be provided for them. In the months since the first communist attack, the children of Korea have suffered much more than the rightful share of several lifetimes. All have met disaster as participants, not as spectators. Yet their faith has conquered despair. Their hope for their land's future remains strong, if only to guarantee that their prayers for a life untroubled by sudden death and famine and war be granted, the free world's efforts in Korea will stand forever as noble ones.
With other free members of the United Nations, the United States met the communist attack in Korea with bravery and sacrifice. Today, Americans individually and through our government are responding to the needs of the people of South Korea with generosity and compassion. Now, this is Sergeant Stuart Queen, inviting you to be with us again next week, when we will present another look at the big picture.
The Big Picture is a weekly television report to the nation on the activities of the Army at home and overseas. Produced by the Signal Corps Pictorial Center. Presented by the U.S. Army in cooperation with this station. You can be an important part of the big picture. You can proudly serve with the best equipped, the best trained, the best fighting team in the world today, the United States Army.
This is war. War and its masses. War and its men. War and its machines. Together they form the big picture.
Welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Captain Carl Zimmerman. The Big Picture is a report to you from your Army, an Army committed by you, the people of the United States, to stop communist aggression wherever it may strike. The Big Picture traces the course of events in the Korean campaign through first-hand reports of our combat veterans and through film produced by the Army Signal Corps and photographed by combat cameramen. These are the men who daily record on film the big picture as it happens, where it happens. Today, the big picture brings into focus the United Nations offensive in Korea during the months of February and March 1951. You'll see our troops push on despite mud and rain. You'll see the Air Force give support to the 24th Infantry Division. You'll see units of the 25th Division cross the Han River. And later, you'll hear from two men, Sergeant William Taylor and Lieutenant Charles Wright, who both played an important part in the big picture. But now, let's go back to February 20th, 1951.
During the period of 20 February to 20 March, the United Nations Operation Killer continues in the face of weakening enemy resistance and the annual torrential rains. In the western sector, UN forces have reached the Han River, while in the central sector, they have driven north of Wonju to the vicinity of Cheopyeong. On 12 March, Allied troops slam across the Han 15 miles east of Seoul. The attack cuts red supply and communication lines to the city, and on 13 March, the communists abandoned Seoul without firing a shot. With our recapture of the capital city, enemy forces start a general withdrawal on all fronts, offering only token resistance with rear guard elements. UN units in the central sector push beyond Huncheon and threaten the important red supply base of Chunshan. By 20 March, UN forces are closely massed across Korea in a general line 15 or 20 miles from the 38th parallel and continue their advance along all fronts. During the first week of Operation Killer, constant rains and the annual spring thaws produce quagmire conditions, which do more to impede advancing UN columns than spotty red resistance. 1st Cavalry Division elements grind slowly northward in the central sector above Wonju, on the heels of communist rear guard units. The purpose of Operation Killer is identical with that of the UN's limited offensive of the preceding month. General Ridgway again emphasizes that enemy casualties are his main objective. C-119s of the Combat Cargo Command deliver artillery ammo to the 1st Cavalry in the Central Mountain sector, where the only troublesome red resistance is encountered. The load is ejected in a compact cluster, resulting in minimum spread on the drop zone. With road traffic mired, airlift operations again pay off to the advantage of our forces. Nose fuses are screwed into place at an artillery forward position in the Korean hills. Powder increments are unpacked, ready for immediate use. The chain of supply ends as armored artillery batteries fire outgoing rounds at enemy-held points in the wooded hills. Here, white phosphorus shells pound communist positions. Air bursts hurl metal fragments into the enemy emplacements. Since the Korean War began, the UN forces' close and plentiful artillery support has helped greatly to neutralize the large numerical superiority of the Reds. And here, artillery again softens communist defenses, clearing the way for the renewed Allied offensive. United Nations air power continues its around-the-clock pounding of men and materiel. Merciless attrition and interdiction sorties prevent the communists from consolidating in any large buildup of forces.
this was Operation Killer in Korea. We were attacking all along the front and chalking up as many Chinese casualties as we could. With the 24th Division at this time was Sergeant Bill Taylor of Oxford, North Carolina. Well, Bill, you were a platoon sergeant, right?
That's right, sir.
Could you give us an idea of just what the duties and responsibilities of a platoon sergeant are?
Well, the first thing a platoon sergeant is responsible for, sir, is his men and equipment. You have to look out for your men to see that they are given the proper equipment, and also you have to make sure that they're at the right place at the right time. In other words, more or less father, sister, mother, and brother.
And most of the time you didn't have an officer around to give you a hand either, did you?
That's true, sir.
This was Taylor's platoon.
That's right, sir.
Right, and you were pretty proud of it, Bill?
Yes, sir, I was.
Well, let's talk about the weapons. Now, this was a mortar platoon, wasn't it?
That's correct, sir.
Can you tell us about the weapons you used?
Well, sir, we had two types of weapons, 57 recoilless rifle and a 60-millimeter mortar. And a 60-millimeter mortar, it's a small shell, though, even though if it's used correctly, it is a very, very good weapon. Now, by removing the safety pin and dropping it in the tube, it sets the shell off so that when contact is made with this impact fuse, it sets the shell off. It has a casualty producing radius of about 11 yards.
Now, this was to give support to a rifle company, wasn't it?
That's right, sir.
Well, how about the 81 mortar over here?
And the 81 is used to support a battalion. And unlike the 60 millimeter, it has more casualty producing radius, and it also goes further in range.
Chinese got to know these weapons, didn't they, Bill?
That's right, sir.
Well, what was the roughest action you saw in Korea?
Well, I'd say, sir, Hill 1157.
What happened there?
Well, sir, we pushed off in the morning approximately 5 o'clock, and it took us all day long to get to the top of it. There was a lot of rough climbing, and snow was deep. It made it slicky. You'd probably sometimes take one step and slide two.
Well, besides many other things, this rifleman had to be a mountain climber, too, huh?
That's right, sir.
Well, tell us what happened up there, Bill.
Well, finally, when we got to the top of it, which was about 8 o'clock at night, we pushed up on the highest knob. As we got to the top, after we pushed up there, the gooks come back and took the hill again, pushed us off of it. So then, as it was after it was night and we had nowhere to go, and the gooks was all around us anyhow, we stopped at the bottom of the knob and set up a company perimeter.
Were you able to dig in at all, Bill?
No, the ground was frozen. Also, the snow was so deep we didn't have any chance to dig in.
Well, how'd you form a defense there?
Well, we set up a circle. In other words, we put all our men we had in a circle so that we could guard all sides. They were attacking us from all sides.
You were wounded about this time, too, weren't you?
Well, about 4 o'clock in the morning, sir, when I was wounded.
What was going on then?
Well, I was told to take my squad, as I was a squad leader at the time, and fill in a gap in the line. And this gap was pretty close to machine guns, and as I was trying to get them in position, they threw some more mortar rounds in, and I was wounded by one of those mortar rounds.
Took a lot of casualties on this hill, didn't we?
Quite a few, sir.
Were we able to take care of them?
Well, our company medics did the best job they could do, naturally, but as far as evacuating the wounded at night, you couldn't do it. It was impossible.
How about the next morning?
Well, as soon as daylight came, we sent all the men that could walk. We sent them off the hill. Of course, we tied some of our patients into a litter and took them down that way by South Korean jiggy bears, and another way we evacuated a few of them by helicopter.
When you were fighting on this hill, Bill, was there any infiltration going on?
Well, once we caught a Chinese in our perimeter folding a GI blanket, and one of our South Koreans spoke to him, and right away he jumped off the side of a hill there and slid down a little gully.
Well, Bill, there were a lot of hills like 1157, weren't there?
Yeah, but not all as hard to climb as that one.
But there were a lot of hills.
That's true.
And you couldn't go around them, you had to go over them.
That's it, exactly.
Well, Bill, let's see some of those hills now, as we watch your old outfit, the 24th Division, continue to pound the Chinese.
During the period 5 to 12 March, the United Nations attrition offensive moved steadily ahead in the Yangpyeong area north of the Han River. Across muddy and snow-streaked fields, troops of the 24th Division carry the battle to the enemy, with a heavy strike at strong communist forces entrenched on the western foothills of Korea's central mountains. Heavy armor of the United Nations moves up in close support of the 24th Division riflemen. The 8th Army's numerically superior armor enables them to supply Allied foot soldiers with maximum support. These tanks, playing on the superstitious nature of the enemy, are painted with the markings of the tiger. Intensified armor-supported attacks of this kind are rolling back the Red aggressors along most of the front and are preventing them from initiating any offensive action of their own. Assault troops advance to the objective through dense underbrush, where the Reds still hold out despite the heavy artillery pounding. The attack moves to the crest of the hill, and grenades are used to blast the remaining defenders from their deep holes and caves, which enable them to weather the pre-attack pounding. As our advance forces secure the heights, reserve units entrench themselves in the valley to consolidate the gains. 3 midweek Chinese counterattacks are turned back by the 24th Division here in the area of the Pukan River as the Reds attempt to outflank the 25th Division salient to the west. Other groups take time out for food and rest before resuming the attack against Red strong points established on the adjacent hills. In preparation for the present assault, a forward mortar position is excavated in the frozen ground halfway up the hill. The mortar is emplaced in this advanced location where it will be able to fire upon the enemy-held high ground. The sights are aligned and the 60mm begins its explosive attack. A recoilless rifle is brought into action against the stubborn resistance. A machine gun lends its firepower as the advance gets fully underway. A Chinese prisoner is brought in for questioning after the position is taken in a hard but surprisingly short fight. The PW is uncertain of what treatment to expect, and anticipating the worst, he warily eyes his captors as they execute only a thorough search. On 7 March, assault troops of the U.S. 25th Infantry Division advanced to the Han River 15 miles east of Seoul. Elements of the 27th Regiment take time out for food before resuming the advance. Because of its frequent use in emergency action, this regiment has come to be known as the Fire Brigade. On the south bank of the Han, an engineer bulldozer clears an approach for a floating bridge to be erected across the river. This bridge will accommodate the medium tanks and other heavy vehicles. The 25th Division crossing begins early. The craft were brought up from the rear during the long period of waiting since the United Nations troops first reached the Han early last month. Elements of this crossing encounter little or no enemy resistance. Men of a heavy mortar squad prepare breakfast, but remain constantly on the alert. The call comes. The command to fire is given, and the crew swings into action. A tank adds its lethal punch. UN troops examine a deserted Chinese gun emplacement in the path of the advance. A causeway for a footbridge across the Han is constructed. Ducks are brought up to accommodate a greater number of troops in the crossing. Later, they do double duty by bringing back Chinese prisoners. A short 2 hours after the initial crossing, U.S. engineers are well along in their construction of a footbridge. This bridge will provide additional means of crossing for larger groups of infantrymen. Two engineers have taken unexpected plunges into the cold water of the river, and men in an assault boat go to their rescue. The accident doesn't seem to dampen the spirits of either man, and soon the footbridge is completed and in operation. By late afternoon, the entire 25th Division is across the river, and the day's objective is secured. The bridgehead is continually expanded, and by week's end, patrols are engaged in probing action 7.5 miles north of the Han.
That's how the 25th Division made the difficult crossing of the Han River. Now, to give you a more complete report of the front at this time, here's an Army officer who served with the 1st Cavalry Division. We want you to meet Lieutenant Charles Wright. Well, Chuck, you're wearing the European theater ribbon. You saw infantry action in the European theater then during World War II, right?
Yes, I did.
Well, could you compare the two theaters for us, the European theater then and Korea?
Well, in my opinion, the fighting in Korea is much rougher than the fighting was in Europe. And I'm borne out in that opinion, I think, by other veterans who have served in both the Pacific theater and the European theater in the last war, and later on served in Korea.
Well, in what ways was it rougher, Chuck?
Well, it was rougher mentally and physically, I think, on the people who were there. Physically, and as much as the country was so rugged, the terrain, of course, was all mountainous and very hard to climb. We had very poor road systems, so we had to carry practically everything on our backs. And then mentally, the type of enemy that we were fighting, of course, they're very fanatical people, and they don't mind dying to win a hill and by the thousands. So consequently, we were so greatly outnumbered at all times that our men were forced to stay on the lines for prolonged periods of time, and it just actually wore them down mentally after a period of time.
Well, the Army's made a lot of improvement since World War II.
Yes, there's been a great deal of improvement. The lessons we learned in World War II have been incorporated into what we call the new Army, and we have new weapons now, and improvements made on weapons that we did have in World War II. Of course, there's a great improvement also in our rations, our equipment, and things of that nature. This ration that I have here is a new ration which has just been issued to the troops in Korea, and it's called an assault ration.
This is the ration a man receives before he goes into an attack, right?
That's correct. This ration is very compact. As you can see, the cans are small. And it also is a very good ration. This makes up one meal, and if a man is going into an attack, he can put these in his pocket and carry them along without any trouble at all.
Well, what do we have here, Chuck?
Well, this is a cracker and cookie unit in this can. And this can contains some type of meat, and there is a great variety of different types. This particular one is pork and apple sauce. This packet here is an accessory packet and contains cigarettes, matches, chewing gum, coffee, sugar, can openers, and things of that nature. It's a very good ration.
Yes, it is. Very complete, isn't it?
Yes, it's very complete.
Well, now later on, he's backed up by more complete rations, isn't it?
That's true. This ration doesn't take the place of his regular ration, but it's strictly a supplement, just to carry into an attack where you want to have something light and not be weighted down.
Mm-hmm. Well, getting back to the 1st Cavalry Division, the action you saw, were you with them when the Chinese came through back in November of 1950, Chuck?
Yes, I was with them at that time.
Is that where you were wounded?
Yes, I was wounded there and also captured for a short period of time by the Chinese. You see, our regiment was operating separately at that time, and we were surrounded completely by the Chinese and had a 12 to 14-hour battle. We were so greatly outnumbered that the battle went in their favor, and we were finally forced to withdraw. And the Chinese, as I said, were all around us, and they set up roadblocks on our routes to withdrawal. And I was eventually wounded several times, and being unable to walk, I was placed in a tank. And this tank later had to be abandoned, and because of my wounds, I couldn't keep up with the rest of the people, and I was captured by the Chinese.
How long were you a prisoner, Chuck?
Well, I was only a prisoner a very short time because I had a chance to escape through a freak, more or less, and I did make good my escape and got back to the American lines the next day sometime.
What's the most important support your rifle company received, Chuck?
In my opinion, Carl, it was artillery by all odds. Artillery is something that you can depend on at all times. You can get artillery on a moment's notice, and through the communication system that they have now, it's very fast and very accurate. They can get a lot of fire on a very small target immediately.
Mm-hmm. Well, Chuck, we salute you and the men of the 1st Cavalry Division. But now let's get back to the story of the Korean fighting in March of 1951.
By mid-March, the renewed United Nations offensive is rolling steadily forward, nearing the 38th parallel. Members of a 7th Division reconnaissance patrol strike northward through land from which the communist forces have been withdrawing rapidly, but in good order. The tank-reinforced patrol finds little opposition from the retreating Reds. Communist resistance, which had previously been stubborn at many key points, now seems to have collapsed in most areas. However, their withdrawal route is studded with anti-tank mines and booby traps. Mine detectors sweep the narrow roads. Engineers repair a road dynamited by the retreating Reds. The collapse of communist resistance below the parallel seems to indicate that the Reds hope to prepare their spring offensive in North Korea, unmolested by UN ground attacks. The blasted area is quickly restored, and the patrol continues toward the boundary line. Enemy casualties are low as the communists, pulling back mostly at night, carry out their retreat according to careful plan. In its dash toward the parallel, the patrol passes through many gutted villages, visual testimony of the toll of war. One tank wallows in a stream, disabled by an enemy mine cleverly placed at the stream ford. Although time is precious, an attempt is made to tow the disabled tank from the water. Operating on a strict schedule, the patrol is attempting to reach the 38th parallel and return during the daylight hours. The tank bogs down in midstream and has to be abandoned. Loose equipment and removable armament are quickly stripped from the derelict tank. Near the parallel, Red rear guard positions are raked with .50 caliber fire. A few miles short of their objective, the patrol finds a demolished bridge blocking further advance and heads back to report on enemy activity encountered.
Those were the events that comprised the big picture from February 20th to March 20th, 1951. Our thanks to Lieutenant Charles Wright and Sergeant William Taylor for being with us. Next week, the big picture will again show the United Nations offensive. You'll see our paratroopers landing near Munsan. You'll see Republic of Korea troops in action. You'll see the strength of an 8th Army infantry tank team. From Europe, you'll see the activation of SHAPE and hear a message from General Eisenhower. And again, you'll hear from 2 combat veterans who saw, as it happened, a part of the big picture. This is Captain Carl Zimmerman, inviting you to be with us then.